Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Glasshouse Sessions. Today, today there's actually been a load of cool stuff. The biggest one is obviously the predatory Sparrow attack on steelworks in Iran, which I think we're going to talk about for a while. There is a lot of strum and drone about Ukrainian cyber wars, if they exist or not. Microsoft has come out with a report saying that they saved the day single-handedly with the power of friendship and information sharing and a public-private partnership. And just recently, there's been another article that came out that said Pixar didn't happen, and we'll see how that goes. We have our own opinions on Ukrainian cyber, obviously. Let's see. Oh, there was the article by Chris Bing on the Indian hackers being hired out by lawyers and working on litigation cases, which was mostly interesting for the scale of what's going on. CISA is releasing more things, shields up. Oh yeah, more some bollocks about TikTok being a big problem, and it's like whatever. We can get to it. Basically, the government is asking for TikTok to be taken out of the app stores. Oh,
so hold on.
There was some.
So let's end the TikTok thing just because it's an easy one to kick out of the way early. At this point, okay, even if they ban it, does it even matter? They've had multiple years now to operate. Like,
what information is left to steal?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they're just looking for a completion for their OPM stack.
And the whole, yeah, right. The corroboration, and the whole thing is people are not, in the spirit of your threat model is not my threat model. Like if you're a teen or 20 something in America, the MSS can't hurt you. The FBI can totally hurt you, right? Let's worry about the entity, the legal entity that can reach out and touch you. Right, because the bureau can, or any law enforcement organization can subpoena information from a app company and do something to you.
Right. Let's bounce on that one with the abortion stuff. Right. If you are going to be posting okay, I won't.
No. My point was going to be what timeline of concern are we on? Because let's look at it as a couple of different levels, right? Whenever it comes to anything to do with a fucking app and all these sort of ad market type places like Instagram or whatever, one aspect of this is the collection opportunity, which Facebook has proven as a company that is having everyone's, cookie, dark profile, ad profile, IP, everything correlated in one place, right? You basically create like NSA's treasure map, but on a private side, and there's a massive monetization aspect to that, but also an easy intelligence collection aspect to it. So I could definitely see wanting to take that over from the Chinese standpoint. I mean, why not if you have the opportunity to? If we're going to talk about kids and sort of what's going to happen to them and whatnot, and why it matters, like how much of a long game are we talking about here? Because there's, nobody gives a shit about what Zoomers are up to right now, but I think having the trove of all the dumb shit we all did 10 years ago on Facebook when it first kicked off, or MySpace, it turns a lot more valuable when we're all in our 30s and 40s. So are we giving them that kind of strategic planning, or is this just all short term?
I'm thinking that a lot of that value is more about blackmail and coercion rather than or scuppering someone's career by revealing something untoward. But unless you'd be doing TikToks of your killing kittens, a lot of the cultural mores are changing as we go forward, and also I think that the Zoomers will have a very different perspective of dumb shit you did on the internet than like the boomers did, than we do, and even the millennials, because they will have grown up with dumb shit on the internet by their parents, right? Like,
yeah, I think it's a good point. I mean, the people who you know, I'm there was no internet when I was or cell phones or big cameras and that sort of thing. So all my dumbassery is lost to the ages, and the memories of the people who were there. And as a consequence, you know, there you know, a few years ago there were consequences, because geezers could point fearlessly at young people and say, oh, look at this foolishness, we can't have you associated with us. Which is a fair amount of hypocrisy. But I think you're right. The outlook is going to change. It's like, yes, people have been known to drink beer and act a fool. So why, you know, okay, we've all been there. But if it's like you and a knife and, like, you know, small animals, it's.
I think the concern over TikTok, which, I mean, first of all, like, amazing success on their part. The idea that they could outgrow everyone else is like the most visited website. Like, who could have ever told when it was just a fucking, you know, everybody doing their dances and stuff. But to me, the concern about TikTok, even in the Trump administration, revealed the true power of something like Instagram. Like, I saw it as equivalent to, hey, the Chinese want to buy Instagram. Holy shit, what happens when that data actually transfers over to their hands? That's sort of the equivalence that I looked at. And I think it brings us back, like, Grug, I mean, you mentioned sort of Roe v. Wade. I wasn't going to focus on Roe v. Wade as much as the conversation that brought us to that when this all kicked off, which was ad trackers and the horrors of sort of the dark market for data and how folks are being tracked to a level that's just, you know, beyond the pale, right? Like, now we're having conversations about, you know, what's appropriate to have as a period tracker. And there's a lot of, you know, awfulness that goes down that path. But I think it is, those things are a subset of the horrors that come with Instagram style data. And that's what TikTok is. It's their native born version of that shit. And it's the cutesy Disney World Mickey Mouse side of data collection that nobody thinks is important, because they just think that people are trying to sell you, you know, a better t-shirt or a fucking water bottle. And in reality, it's identity, browser, device, IP, and everybody you've ever known all put together.
Right. So part of it is because for the average person, your exposure to the amount of data collection that happens is the occasional article that says there's a lot of data collection that happens and it's bad. Then your actual experience is weird ads on Instagram, or, you know, I bought a toilet seat and now they won't stop advertising toilet seats. Har, har, har. Like, it's these not very insightful glimpses of, like, the beast.
There's also then I want to also point out, like, because there's the stuff that often, like the toilet seat, you get the constant toilet advertisements, but there's also where it gets into the, like, dangerous uncomfortableness as well, where it's, you know, if you're looking for end of life care for a pet and they advertise then aggressively those things, and it kind of results in a consistent re-traumatizing.
Yeah, not to mention the predictive stuff. I mean, I think that's where the moments where people have really freaked out is like, oh man, like, I didn't know I was pregnant and I found out because of the ads, right? Like, the moments where the algorithms really show how powerful and horrifying they are when folks realize, like, holy shit. I have to use this to plug in The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, which I still think is one of the best books written in the past 10 years. And I would kill to have Shoshana Zuboff in one of these calls. But there is something larger here that I think even those of us well steeped in InfoSec aren't properly conceptualizing, which is how much the targeted silos and the data collection and sort of the not just predicting people's behavior, but the ability to influence it slightly at scale have essentially broken the fabric of society. Like, there's no we deal with the disinformation side of it as a byproduct in our like research groups and all of our concerns about.
That's a really crude, like it's really crude disinformation as well, compared to like what Facebook and Instagram and so on do themselves. Like,
but it also comes to
market level, like on a spending.
It also comes through the same vehicle. So you're used to seeing, if you're used to seeing shitty ads sometimes, and then all of a sudden it's that consistent blasting you with the same information to leave it in your head.
Yeah, I think the argument that Zuboff puts forth that we are not discussing, and I say the collective we, is it breaks capitalism at its most foundational level to be able to influence markets at scale, spending habits at scale, but not in a uniform fashion, right? Like I can get, if I'm in this glorious position of Instagram or TikTok or whatever, and I can just say, well, I'm going to push this type of spending on 45-year-old boomers for these particular months. I mean, there's no invisible hand anymore. Now we're just talking about the corporatized hand and the whole foundation of
invisible corporate hand.
Yeah, the invisible corp. But no, like it's no longer an invisible hand in the sense that like that was a very crude analogy for the sake of like things will balance themselves out between supply and demand and what the markets want and whatnot. Now it's an artificial pushing of the scales, and none of our concepts are prepared for this.
So let me throw kind of a curveball at you with this, which is what if perhaps that TikTok being accessible in the US market is actually a good thing because it provides at least some illusion of competition for Facebook and Google, because I would argue that Facebook and Google have a monopoly in the online advertising space. I feel like that's probably not a very controversial statement to make, but who are you going to go with besides either of those two? And even if you do go with a third option, are they just a front end for Google essentially? So the very least, it's forcing there to be at least some competitiveness in a marketplace that's already very limited.
I think our fear
instead of 3, there's now 4.
Yeah, right? But it's not quite that, is it? Right? Like, I mean, we're talking about something it's the medium. It's not a competitor. It's not like someone stood up a Burger King in front of a McDonald's, but you're standing on the same street. This is to say somebody built a different street. You're not going to see the McDonald's at all. And I think our fear betrays how imbalanced the whole thing is. Like the idea that somebody else is building the roads and they're going to completely pull us off, both from our collection opportunities and our ability to influence, is suddenly terrifying. But we weren't willing to regulate that when it was a US company. We are willing to do stupid, like let's block the app from the app store type stuff when it's the Chinese. And I think it should just entail some soul searching that we haven't really been willing to do.
Well, like No Bus is basically about American exceptionalism, right? And it's not necessarily a technical thing, really. It's in ways it's just about like, we don't want anyone else to have this because we know what we do when we have it. Like that was the argument against Huawei.
Threat actors, okay?
I agree with that. Like there is like, to me, No Bus is fundamentally having some minor level of operational maturity enough to be like, shit, I don't want to poke a hole in someone's network and then let someone else come in as well. Because there's been too many cases of that in the past where like actors are just rolling with the shittiest tools on the fucking planet. And they're like, well, I'm gonna open a port, an open web shell and port 8000 and just hope for the best.
Yeah, Grug. Quick shitting on American
I'm sufficiently chastised.
American exceptionalism is having a rough go right now. Okay, the least
American exceptionalism is a great thing, and it's God ordained, and I'm sorry I ever questioned it.
Thank you.
I clearly
fine, right. Yeah, this is our version of
stop huffing ether. That's what it comes down to.
It's web 2.0 manifest destiny. We should own all the tubes. We will own the tubes from one ocean to the other, and it shouldn't go anywhere else.
There we go.
Hey,
that's the quote. Web 2.0 manifest destiny. That's the quote. all right, we're done. Glasshouse has reached peak Glasshouse. Okay, I actually do want to, like, we've only spent 20 minutes talking about something briefly because we could get rid of it really quickly. Silas. Because I think the more interesting thing is absolutely Iran getting their shit wrecked, but in a very responsible way.
I mean, I feel like I had to shake us up to get this topic going. So I'd like to hear like a full, proper like story at this point of this, and I'm hoping Juan can provide like what the fuck this is to lay the context.
Me with the fucking car bomb special. All right. So what we heard, what was it, 2 days ago? I want to say on the 29th, was that, you know, Gonjeshke Darand, which is a known front for the Meteor Express threat actor, suddenly pushed out a series of tweets, including a video of a steel plant in Iran essentially going fucking haywire, setting itself on fire. I don't know shit about ICS. I defer that completely to folks that are far smarter than I. But I can tell you that it looks like that shit got wrecked. That my expertise can tell you. They push it along with some pictures of a panel, and interestingly, a discussion about how essentially signaling their responsibility. They say, you know, we took down these targets. It's like 3 different steel companies in Iran. They suggest that these are sanctioned companies that were operating anyway. So there's kind of like this kind of righteous thing to what they're doing, and that they were careful not to harm civilians. So we're in this really interesting place, right? Like if you think about this operation all put together, it's like you are a hacktivist front. You're not owning up to being any kind of state actor, but you're worried about being a responsible state actor, picking your targets the right way and not having collateral damage. It's really interesting.
So what I think is going on there is, yeah, it's exactly what you said, but I think that the state actor behind it obviously knows that other state actors are aware of who they are. I don't think anyone is fooled by the front. You know, it's not like the US is going like, gee, I wonder what those kids are up to these days. Wow, a steel plant, go get them, right? Like they have pretty good visibility and they know what's going on. And so the signaling is not like, it's partially meant for us to say like, look, we're responsible. But I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to establish norms of like, there's a lot of talk about, you know, like you do not hack ICS stuff. Like you do not fuck around with like the really important, big, scary things. And I think what they're saying is like, that is not, that's basically like the sex ed, which is just amnesty, or sorry, like the not having sex, whatever the fuck it is in the US that they do. Right? Like it's just abstinence. That's the fucking one. I don't know. I've never practiced.
Doesn't even know the word. Doesn't even know the word.
I live in Thailand. They don't know any of this stuff. Like, like it's not a concept. I'm sorry. I don't hang out with you weird fucking American people.
Degenerate.
Sorry. Like it's a Buddhist country. We're not Christian. We don't have like all that weird guilt stuff and everything. Anyway, point being that it doesn't work. It's not going to work, and it's not feasible. Like you cannot say that these things are off limits by nature of being within some group of target. Like just like historically, there used to be this thing of like hospitals have to be off limits. Like you cannot hack a hospital. But now post-COVID, there's a really, really good argument for why you would want to hack hospitals and have good visibility into what's happening, you know, directly from the hospitals themselves, to be like, oh, okay, like China says that there's no flu thing happening. However, their hospitals are clearly showing, you know, that's different. So I think in this case, that what they're putting out is like, look, you know, rather than going this ridiculous route, what we're saying is there is a way that you can do this as a responsible threat actor. Like you can do responsible offensive actions, and this is what we believe that should look like.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for it in that. Look, let's really boil this down, right? We have been asking for the more seasoned threat actors like the US to come out and say, this is what responsible threat actors look like. And to this day, I understand all the complexities, all the government arguments, all the bullshit, but it's a constant source of disappointment that US overclassification puts us in a position where even someone like Michael Hayden can't come out and say, look, this is how we did things 10 fucking years ago, and this is why we did them this way, and this is what a responsible threat actor looks like. So, like, you know, it's really hard to define rules of the road when you won't admit that you're a driver, right? Like, it's very hard. So in that sense, I like this, but I am very curious, like, is the messaging for us? Is the messaging for other governments? Is the messaging for us as researchers to fuck off, which is not necessarily beyond the pale. I mean, look, I did the original report on Meteor Express. Checkpoint has kept, you know, following up on them, pretending they don't see us there. There's a lot of stuff. Hamid Kashfi has found a lot of interesting things about these different attacks. We found more things that we didn't necessarily get around to writing up, like the gas pump attack, which was super interesting. So it's not that they're hard to track for the most part. And I think to some extent, it even feels like Iran is purposefully enabling us, because who the fuck just keeps uploading all these things to VT? Like, oh, yeah, here's this attack. And like, you just kind of keep putting it up there. You know, we're not naive in that sense. It's more that this is a very interesting attack. It is definitely kind of a milestone moment where someone has clearly decided that we've gone from tit for tat, haha, you know, you jab at us, you do a little breach here, we do a little breach there, to, you know, the Iranians set off like missile warning sirens in Israel, and then you see, you know, Iranian steel mills blowing up, right? Like, I feel like we're kind of escalating, and there's definitely an element of this that very much feels like, you know, just fuck off, like we know what we're doing. And I'm tempted to just say, yeah, go ahead, you know, like.
Well, I wonder how much of this is also a factor of oh, you know, the lawyers are involved and we want to adapt to this. This is the fifth domain, and we want to adapt our norms and our behaviors of you know, the laws of war and Geneva Convention and all that jazz to this space, and versus the realization that we can't defend ourselves, right? Oh, don't attack hospitals. That's off limits. Well, in a kinetic environment, yes, that makes sense, right? You don't attack the hospital. You don't want somebody to attack your hospital, but cybercom isn't here to protect your hospitals, right? And NSA is not here to protect your steel mills. You want people to have these behaviors because we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the policy, we don't have all the things that would normally work in a kinetic environment.
Yeah, and so I think that's it. But it's like the way that those norms are going to be established is not the way that the US have been trying to do it, and the way that Europe has been trying to do it, which is a whole bunch of academics sit around and they talk about it, and they come out with a paper that says, you know, towards a cyber norms regime considered, you know, whatever. And then they put it out, and like it gets read by fucking other people and Dave Eitel, and then Dave Eitel rips it to shreds. And, you know, they
add that to my database.
Yeah,
sorry.
and there's no bit upset about it. And then
cyber dogs did not bark in Iran, bro.
Right. And then so like that's what's happening. And I think, you know, if there are going to be cyber norms, it's going to be because this like what I would say, like it's a thing that I was writing about at one point for class, which is the two sides communicate by violence, which is the look, I will not shell you during lunchtime if you don't shell me during lunchtime. And that way everyone gets to have, you know, from noon until 1 to sort of cook their food and, you know, have a drink and have a shit and all this stuff without getting shelled. And it's sort of like, live and let live conditions in the trenches were created on the ground. It was hated by the people who ran the war because they wanted the war to run. They didn't want guys to not fight. But I think that same dynamic is what's going to happen here with cyber, is that you're going to have actors come out and say, this is the thing that we are doing, and you can see we believe that this is the responsible way to do it. And if
it's a
other actors
signaling, finally, right? Like, you can't fucking sit around all day saying, oh, you have no idea the kind of cyber power we got, and expect people to be deterred, right? Like, this is what it should look like, right? Hey, if you're gonna fucking blow up a car on our side, we're gonna fucking blow up an entire missile depot on your end. Like, fuck off. And dude, I'm having a really hard time adversely judging this threat actor. Like, I know I should on some level, but I look.
Why? I mean, they like I don't know.
Because of the ICS boundary, right? Like, that's what we've always been saying. There's this line in the sand. Rob Lee drew it himself with his finger, and like, you're not supposed to cross it. And they are, but they're almost saying, like, look, man, we're enforcing sanctions. We're not killing civilians. We're just telling these people to fall.
So hold on, though. But here's the thing. There's a problem that I see with the classification of ICS, and I see it in the same way that I do with the problem of when things get classified as critical infrastructure. I personally don't think Twitter should be critical infrastructure, but because it is the communication, it is critical infrastructure because it is the primary communication channel for several municipalities, many municipalities, like their Twitter feed and their Facebook things. So like, we've already kind of diluted the space of these, but I really like the fact that like they have said, like, we took precautionary things to avoid the impact to civilians and things like that, which
they said that 3 times, by the way, which I think, like, it was in their tweet, it's in the video, and it's visibly in the video. Yes. Like, they were pretty emphatic about what they were, what they were trying to communicate. Like, it's like tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them.
Yes.
And sorry, Silas.
And the thing is like, to me, it's a, like, you don't hack a bank across state lines, man. Like, you take precautions not to impact civilians. It's like, okay, that's easy. We can all get that. That's a good signaling of where their comfort levels lie. And the thing is I think if you're going to hit, inevitably there will be times that critical infrastructure get hit. Inevitably there will be times that ICS stuff gets hit. But Target was also enabled. Wasn't Target also partially enabled through, like, well, it was the air conditioning vendor or something like that got popped, and then they persisted over, like, but does that also fall into that category as well? I mean, and again, this is a steel plant. It's not a power grid. Yeah, I feel your pain.
Yeah, no, like,
steel plant.
I think they've established, like, if you're going to be doing effects-based operations that could potentially harm people, which, is quite a large number of them, you have to take measures. And these were concrete, right? It wasn't just like, look, it's 3 a.m. There's no way there's anyone still at the plant, right? Like, that's totally one way you could do it. Or you could hack the CCTV and you could fucking visually confirm that there's no one there.
Yes, and that's really important as well. Like, they ensured and took good steps around it to ensure that they didn't impact a third party.
Dude, that's the whole point, right? Like, they're no joke. This isn't a fucking hacktivist group. It's not a collective full of kids. Like, this is professional as shit. And I love it. I mean, in a sense, I love that we are getting an example of this is what a responsible state actor would do under the circumstances. Like, if you took the cuffs off and you said you need to send a message, don't fuck up. Like, 3 plants, let's assume they're right and they're telling the truth, because we don't have proof that this is how everything went down, and we don't know that it happened to all 3 plants. But let's say that it went down the way they say. 3 plants, same time, CCTV coverage of where everyone is in there. You go in and you melt the fucking plant down without killing anybody. All 3 at the same time. And then you have glorious footage to show everyone else not just how responsible you are, but how dope your operation was. Like, chef's kiss. I mean,
right. So, and I think that's a point, actually. The fact that they did 3 at the same time is incredibly impressive. But another thing that I want to bounce on that is what appears to be their ingress vector, like the way that they did the access was from this IRIS, is it?
Or IRASA or something like that.
Yeah. So it's a company that provides like infrastructure services to steel plants, but it's the one in Iran that provides infrastructure services to all of the steel plants, not just those 3. And so what I'm curious about, and I think we might find, is that those 3 were the 3 that were sanctioned out of all of the plants that they could have had access to. They chose those ones. Like, I suspect that, like the level of messaging that they're trying to put forward is very, very sophisticated. It's not just we didn't hurt people, it's that our targeting was based on, because it's sanctions, it's internationally accepted. The entire world condemns these 3 groups. Therefore, when we hit them, we're totally in line with international norms and whatever. Like, we're not rogue and we're not, choosing people ourselves. You guys did this. We're just acting on it.
This is really fascinating. I mean, it's a fascinating exercise in norm setting. It's a fascinating exercise in the discussion of what responsible CNA would look like if you took all the like legalese bullshit out of it. Because responsible in this case, and I mean, someone in the chat accurately sort of commented, right? Like, normally people in the building wouldn't necessarily be the responsible thing to do, but in comparison to what we're seeing coming out of Iran, it is very responsible, right? I love this in that, we don't know who is behind this, but whoever it is a very wily actor who's willing to set bullshit aside.
There's 8,200 options of who it could be.
I'm saying they're willing to put bullshit aside and just do what they think common sense dictates would be the right thing to do. And we need a little bit more of that. Like, this has been, especially with the US dictating things the way that they are, and it's 8,200 lawyers in the fucking room telling you exactly why you shouldn't do anything. And then, even with NSPM 13, the only arguably good thing that happened during the Trump administration, even that we want to roll back so that the White House and State Department can get in the middle of every fucking operation again. Like, we are, as I've said before, a roided out sitting duck. We're fucking huge and we can't move at all. So I do appreciate being taught responsible action in the field by a wily state actor who's willing to put that shit aside and say, look, man, signaling is possible. So you just melt down 3 plants, right?
Well, I'll also call this out as well. It's not just that they melted 3 plants, but it's that they also controlled the public narrative after, so that there is still ambiguity. There is no way to remove ambiguity, but they at least presented their side of the messaging and explained, hey, we were responsible. These videos aren't just like fun actor like porn. It's like, we're here to tell you how we also did it safely, and there is definitely credit that's due for that.
Hacktivists can't melt steel beams. There we go. That's what I was looking for.
That's the tweet. That's the tweet right there.
There we go. Yeah, no, so here's the thing, is what I think is interesting about this particular threat actor is they do interesting attacks. They go out of their way to not harm people, and they don't just do signaling, they do messaging, right? Like, a signal is sort of like, it's 1 bit, like it's a on or an off or whatever. It's not very useful, not without the context. And that's what these guys are now doing, is they're providing all of the context around it so that you cannot misinterpret what they're trying to say, right? Like, it is very, very clear what they mean. And I think that is, it's a luxury that you can have when you're doing an effects-based operation. It's not something you can do when you're doing like a clandestine collection operation, because you can't post on Twitter, hey, GRU, we're leeching all of your mails, but we're doing it without looking for PII or, anything like that. We're just like, you cannot advertise in the same way. So
the MFA Russia can't drop online and be like, don't worry, we're going to be respecting GDPR with this breach.
Yeah, and so I bring that up because I think SolarWinds, the way that it was done, was actually responsible. Like the way they had access to a huge number, and then they shut off access to everyone that they didn't want. Like I think that is the sort of behavior that we want to encourage, right? Like same with the CC cleaner when there were like 50,000 installs and 3 people got hacked.
Oh, it was like 1.5 million. I've used your tweet about it in presentations for years because it was well over because the server got reset, but there was at least 1 million that had checked in, and then it was like 23 total. Like,
right? Yeah. So this is what we want, right? It's you have to accept that supply chain attacks, when they happen, are going to have a huge splash area, compared to what you actually want to hit. And if the threat actor exploiting that goes out of their way to show that they're dialing it in and they're not exploiting that access, they're cutting themselves off, that's good. That's responsible. That's what I would want to see.
Is the irresponsibility of a supply chain attack inherent in the supply chain attack? Like, I say this because obviously the ones we've seen have been pretty shit, and they're uncomfortable, right? When you look at like the Chinese just sort of seeding backdoors that aren't even all that secure, right? It's not Novus, it's not something all that fantastic. It's just poking holes in like 1 million networks at the same time. But let's imagine what a Five Eyes supply chain attack would look like, right? Where Novus, very selective, even let's say instead of hitting everyone that uses a Rust package manager, they put it in sanctions software for designing nuclear plants, right? Like very small subset of people. It's a target rich environment. No, you're not everyone you hit is bad, but we're talking about you've shortened the pool, and then it's Novus, right? Only they can access it. Is that an inherently irresponsible supply chain attack? And if it isn't, what is it that does it? Is it the targeting pool? Is it the Novus aspect of it? Like, because it's still just CNE.
Yeah, I think you did hit on it. It's I think what we look for in responsible behavior is things like it's limiting down, and it's sort of proportionality in a way. Like, yes, you have access to everyone, but you only need 3 people, so you only hit those 3 people. And then if you go that step beyond, where you lock yourself out from everyone else as well, like you saying like, okay, yes, we had access to everyone, but since we only want these people, we're going to block ourselves off from all these others because that's not what we want, and it's not part of our targeting set. So there you go. Like I think it's about like the targeting the scope, and it's also the not opening it up to others aspect. It's if you're going around and you mass own a whole bunch of places, and then you leave like an exposed web shell, like that's irresponsible. It is slightly more responsible if it is a well protected and secured web shell.
How much do you think the software that's chosen matters in it? Because I can see there being a potential problem if it's the difference between backdooring something like, Counter-Strike versus backdooring something that does medical imaging processing, and something that could have a impact if it fails because of the backdoor.
Yeah, I think I don't know. This is definitely a complex issue, and this is the sort of thing where the academics actually do maybe have some value in there, sitting around and writing up papers, like towards a framework for responsible offensive actions.
What would be a responsible supply chain attack? Like, what are the prior conditions for it?
honestly, this is worth writing about, right? Like this, if anyone's sitting around trying to come up with a bullshit thesis to write about, like this is there. Look, everyone has embraced supply chain attacks. We thought that was totally anathema to the standards of nation state threat actors before, where you would want to kind of keep a low profile. Clearly, we were wrong. Everyone has embraced it to some extent. Now, let's talk about the difference between, you know, a hafnium and a solar winds. Not that hafnium really counts, but you know, you're spraying web shells that anybody can fuck with at half of the planet versus like you got access to every solar winds person that updated, but then you carefully choose who you escalate with and who you leave, and you know, there's a disinfection mechanism, etc. Like, what are the boundaries for when we are going to bitch and when we're going to say this is fine? And I don't think it's a trivial matter, and it is one worth discussing, because alarmism, or your Brad Smith 1000 engineer, oh my God, solar winds is terrible version of things, kind of keeps us from having the right discussion about this, right? There was a difference between sea cleaner or shadow hammer and solar.
Yeah, it's these absolutist arguments do not help, right? Because this is a very nuanced gray area. And when you come out and you say, look, for example, like with all the Microsoft stuff, where they're like, you know, you guys can do what you like, but the first thing we have to agree is that a norm should be that civilian software should never be hacked. It's like,
right,
what? Like, you know, like it's coming out with these huge blanket statements doesn't work. And it's, yeah, like lumping in all supply chain attacks, you know, as equally bad. That's not useful. Like, if we're trying to have more responsible behavior, we're not saying, you know, we're trying to have no one hack at all, which is, you know, the most responsible behavior in one sense. What we're trying to say is, you are doing risky behavior. Here's how you're going to do that risky behavior so that it impacts the minimum number of people, and it is, you know, the safest way of doing it, so that when you fuck it up or whatever, it doesn't cause problems for innocence. You know, yeah. That's roughly what we're trying to say. And to have people coming out and saying this cannot happen at all, that does not help us advance the conversation and get to a rule set that we can live with.
This is the conversation. These are the conversations that should have been held 30 years ago. But we were so fascinated with, well, two things. One, we were fascinated with the sci-fi. You know, you know, we're gonna you know, computer our way to victory, and the fact that nobody in warfare circles thought that this was a serious business, right? This is just computer nerdy stuff. And, you know, there's a reason why the infantry says, if you're not there, you don't own it, right? Because if you don't have boots on the ground, that's not your territory, right? It's, you know, see Ukraine. So the fact that this stuff was treated as a sideshow of a sideshow, is I mean, it's hindsight, right? We should have paid more attention, and as from the nerd core, we probably could have made a better effort to communicate to those people in the proper context and stuff. But I mean, we're so far behind trying to superimpose these things on an environment that we don't control. I mean, these are also discussions that you should probably have somebody from Google in, and, you know, tier one providers and Facebook and that sort of stuff, or from the you know, technology community to say, look, you know, understand where people are going, right? What's the TikTok after next to really put it into context, so you can start getting ahead of the game, as opposed to like, oh well, we've got this situated for the world, you know, in 1995. Now what? Well, now it's 2030, and
so the thing is, though, is, and I'll question the involvement of some of the larger players in these types of discussions, because then we start to have discussions about what does security look like in the metaverse. And I'm sorry, but that's just not something that I'm digging into these days, and I'll credit some of the more European scholars for going in the direction of, instead of focusing on the VR hypothetical hype engines of some of the larger companies, like going back and working at it as like a smaller step game. But yeah, it's a challenge, because if we try and look at it as where are we going to go in the future and try to build and prep ahead of where we like what we could have done years ago, that ends up, I feel like that's often now ended with us chasing pipe dream rabbit holes that never come to fruition or are extremely narrow in actual real world scope.
I think you know, Tanji, you said, you know, 30 years ago we should have been having this conversation. It's true, but I also think that we couldn't, for precisely, I mean, I'm so tired of beating this dead horse, right? Overclassification, the way that things sort of developed within the intelligence community, blah, blah, blah. There's that. Then there's also the fact that as we transition into a more publicly informed space, we're continuing to constrict that conversation. A lot of us are busy, so we don't necessarily engage the way we should. And the ones who are engaging are a lot of the time very disingenuous in their engagement with the realities of the field. So a lot of the conversations we're getting still feel like they're out of like a William Gibson novel, right? Where it's like, what would happen in the metaverse of the future if cyber were a problem? You're like, we don't need to be there anymore, right? Like, we can talk about how cyber is developing in the real world, and the edge cases, right? And we don't need to talk about Johnny Mnemonic or Cyberpunk 2077 to discuss insecurity, structural failure, supply chain attacks, you know, network effects. Like, these things are very much a part of where we are now. And they're subject to a certain amount of empirical testing. Like, the things that I was having a conversation with, you know, actually one of the most mature kind of like SOC drivers I've ever met, not long ago, maybe 4 days ago in Israel. And one of the things we discussed is they're testing for patching. And it was like, you know, they have an OT network, they have an IT network, and they test their patches, and you know, they're struggling with the OT network like everybody else does. But you know, what I was asking them was like, look, guys, like, I've never had to run patching at scale. And I have a lot of respect that that's not as simple as like the Pearl Roth tweet, you know, just update, right? But how bad is it really? And that's what I want to understand. Like, how bad, where are the realities of the difficulties patching in a giant network of IT stuff? Where are the realities in the brittleness of an OT network that can't be nmapped? Where are the realities of these things, right? And like, can we have empirical tests about it?
So I can give you two good examples from direct experience. So years ago, I used to work for a manufacturing company. I don't want to say their name, but they make plastic water bottles and lab equipment. They had a great patching cycle. So what they would do is they would do test patching on like a subset of machines ahead of time, and then roll out the full patch about 12 hours later. I would say once every 3 months, there would be some issue with a patch and they would have to hold. But the thing is when you got to the manufacturing floor, they had a huge amount of custom software that they were using. And these are big plastic melting things that shape things into bottles. And that's the extent of my knowledge on how those actually work. But it was a regular thing.
Ask, you know, the vengeful sparrow people. They probably have shells that could tell you.
Probably do. But like, it was a consistent thing, because like there was a lot of software that was extremely dependent on one version of .NET at a very specific patch level. It wasn't just fine to say, you know, .NET 3.4. No, it had to be 3.4.15629, and nonsense like that. The other thing as well is, so never had to do patching for this network, different company. But if we used, I think we used not Nessus, another one of the like phone scanners. And there was a large chunk of the network we just could never scan, period. Because if we scanned it, it would take out the telephone network for thousands and thousands of companies. And it was
I love the attitude I heard when it came to that, Silas, because like these people who actually run massive OT networks, what they said was, well, if something can be taken down by an Nmap scan, we need to replace that shit immediately, which I think is the right attitude. But, you know, that's not what you hear from folks. Right?
Yeah. And I mean, it was one of those things where they were like, well, eventually it'll get replaced, but it will be a 3 or 4 year plan. And part of it there was as well, I think they were waiting for a better technology solution to come out because there just wasn't anything that they could use. So the option was just don't scan it, don't touch it, and pray nothing breaks.
It's just funny to think about that in relation to the conversation we had earlier about ICS networks, that line in the sand, right? Like when you talk about it as needing insane investment from a nation state that has Booz Allen Hamilton developing specialized payloads for PLCs, then we can talk about like, you know, you really overstepped by targeting this thing, right? You had to develop in controller, Stuxnet, whatever. But when like look at the predatory sparrow attack, where it's quite possible that they just went and clicked around on a panel in some shitty piece of like Iranian software and got the effects they wanted. And then consider that in some of these networks, it really could be as simple as walking into, you know, a manufacturing company and Nmap, just putting a box that's constantly Nmap scanning and you break the whole fucking manufacturing line. That's not, you know, you went above and beyond. That is like, you know, we left, the whole thing is so brittle. It was just waiting for you to chuck a baseball in there and the whole thing fell apart. How can that be our line in the sand, right?
But that's also just in general, like that's a thing that happens. So I used to do this event every year called CCDC. It's like a college kid red team, blue team exercise. In the first 2 years I did it, like there's patches in Metasploit from our team, the red team that I was on, because of things like we had too many shells and it crashed Metasploit. Like, and so that initial like time, so for like every now and then we'd be like, hey, this year we're gonna come in an hour late, we're gonna get coffee, hang out, and do dick, and just let shit burn. Because the thing is when students walk in as well, that chaos of like, oh fuck, everything's on fire, like has a huge amount of like damage to a network. And the thing is fundamentally like networks are fragile, and if everybody's bum rushing it in an aggressive fashion, like it will cause damage as well. But it's often pretty easy to just cause that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if the competence level of the attacker is part of the line in the sand thing. Like, it's the like you could be completely fucking useless at what you do, like Anonymous, for example. And if they happen to break into some steel plant and run an operation where they go out of their way not to hurt people, then they would be applying to norms, even though they are pretty much incompetent at, you know, Stuxnet level operations, right? Like they're not achieving that super high Booz Allen Hamilton, you know, Raytheon developed payload packages. Like that's not the requirement to be competent. And sorry, like that's not the requirement for responsible behavior, right? Responsible behavior applies to everyone. And I don't know. We are running super short. We've got 5 minutes left. So we can, does anyone have any last thoughts that they want to go on with sparrows and steel plants? We can try and get to some of the other stories of this week.
Go for it. You have 5 minutes, run with it.
Yeah, I can finish the introduction that we had prepared. Yeah, it is actually, I can't fucking find the doc. Let's see, all right, blah, blah, blah. Oh, something about the Chinese targeting rare earth mining companies. There's a thing about students getting recruited to do translation for APT-40. That I thought was cool primarily because we always forget that a huge part of APT behavior is not, like basically the cyber part of it is the small part of the APT. Like the big part is what happens with the analysis, the processing, and then feeding it into policymakers or industry, whatever. Like that's a huge part of what has to get done, and translation is a massive part of it. That's why in Shanghai, where they have PLA cyber stuff, there's 2 feeder schools. One is a language school and one is a technology school, right? Like just having a technology school only gets you so far. You need to have people who can, speak English and translate, or speak Russian and translate, or Ukrainian, like you need these skill sets.
Why start outsourcing now? I mean, you had the fusion centers. That's something that you've talked about a lot, Grug, in the past. And that obviously includes a much greater, it entails better operational security, obviously, as we're seeing. So why suddenly start outsourcing? Like, is it a matter of technical expertise? Are you missing people that can understand some of the stuff that you're getting, or why?
So I do not know.
It's awesome, but I don't know if that's, if we really need to be sourcing people for.
Maybe that's what you have to do when you start getting petabytes of data. You just
scale. Yeah, scale.
Yeah, like volume. But yeah, I'm wondering like why they surely China has their own Google Translate somewhere that is available only to like the PLA.
Baidu.
One is, yeah, like there must be like translate.baidu.com.
Well, I mean, let's think about all the metaphor and idiom that we've used in the last hour. Right. The machines haven't gotten to that point yet, right? Oh. Or various inside jokes.
Oh my God, we're their mechanical Turk. And a bunch of American college students to do it. What
hammering away.
Yeah.
You get a 15-cent bonus every time you do something that's classified.
Oh God.
But Jags, your point is spot on. I mean, even like the Conti leak stuff, like I've been reading those almost on a daily basis since they came out. And I don't speak Russian. I try and pretend, and like I can recognize like, oh, eto tam, like, but
I see you are a man of Duolingo too. Well done.
Oh yes, very fancy
culture.
Yeah,
well, but at the same time, that doesn't help me when fucking like Stern is bitching about frogs. Like I get it now, but yeah.
I did a fucking 10 years ago. I did a talk on part of the like the language that gets used in Russian cyber forums. Like basically how they have their own like a full dialect, but it's a full set of slang. And I did it with Fyodor, and it was pretty good. But yeah, it was like so much fun. Like they swear at each other all the time. They fucking they use like so many fucking weird pieces of slang. And okay, well, like we're almost out of time. I wanted to mention there was a paper about AI chips and how we have to work now to make sure that China does not get AI chips. And Dave Vitale isn't here, but he had comments on it along the lines of, yeah, even if we do that, it doesn't do anything. Like there's no way to keep China from getting chips, because China is the place that all the chips get assembled. Like you can buy your chips, your boards, but you can't put them together over here. It has to be done over there. So there's like, it makes no sense on its
How much better are the AI chips than the AI chips we already put in like iPhones? Like I understand that there's certain companies that are really
like
on that
NVIDIA GPU stuff, I guess.
But I'm saying, like, you look at like the neural processing stuff that goes into like the M1, M2, the A15 Bionic, like they've already been manufacturing that shit. We don't think of them as like industrial quality AI chips, but they're actually surprisingly good. Like, I don't understand that manufacturing space at all. It just seems like we're fixating on something that we can't really affect at this point.
I think there's a whole lot of having not had an effective strategy and forward-thinking policy decades ago, when there's a chance to actually influence how things are going to go, and just leaving it to sort of run its course, and then finding out like, oh shit, we're not where we want to be. Like, we wanted to be in charge of 5G, but we didn't make that a priority at the time that 5G was getting developed, and now China is. This is a problem. It's like we wanted to be in complete control of like chips and AI, and China is like out publishing us on AI right now. And like, we don't like that, but not rather than going like, well, clearly what we need to do is stand up like a Bell Labs and have our own fucking, pour money into, research for the next thing that's going to come along so that we're actually ahead of things in time. It's just like, well, let's ban it. What, like, can we sanction them? How do we stop them doing what they're doing now? Right? Like
we only have one fucking
fine.
hammer for all these things, right?
Yeah, why
can't Gonjeshke Darand, why can't Predatory Sparrow go take out these AI chip stealing fucking shops and just look, they are setting an example. I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
If what we're saying is our sanctions are unenforceable, we're getting fucked on a financial level, on a strategic level, why can't we play asymmetrical and dirty? And whoever these folks are, they're showing us that we can, and the only limits are our imagination and the amount of lawyers.
America is so fucked. One of the quotes that I've been using a lot recently from Unrestricted Warfare is where they say, like, the only thing that's stopping you from producing these new concept weapons is lucid thinking and rational thought. Unfortunately, the Americans have never been very good at this.
You want to close the call on that?
Yes. And so that's don't blame me, blame Unrestricted Warfare, which is a great book for understanding cyber. Okay, so that's it. We're out of time. Once again, we'd like to thank you for joining us on the Kim Zetter's newsletter, Glasshouse Hour. And
sign up to Kim Zetter's newsletter and the Grug's newsletter.
And my newsletter. It can increase your cyber intelligence by up to 33.333%.
Do you get CDE credits for it?
Yes, you can. You can get 0. Yeah.
Not renewing your creds on that anytime soon, but yes.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, guys.
Take care, guys.
See you next week.
Thank you.
Cheers.